As the global focus remains on the coronavirus pandemic, today we shift our focus to the brighter side of this whole chaos. We talk about New Zealand, a very small nation with a very, very small population, but the relative success it has demonstrated to the world arena has been mainly attributed to the clarity of the message that the government of New Zealand has been able to put across to the public. Now, it's been a demonstration of empathy, clarity, and of course, a trust in science. Now, to shed light on the whole New Zealand experience, today we will be connecting you to the Chief Whip of the Governmental Party of New Zealand, Honourable Michael Wood. And amidst this chaos, when New Zealand is faring really well, being stolen the limelight of the world, we are really, really happy to be connecting with you, virtually though. So, at the very, very outset, what is the coronavirus situation exactly like at the moment in New Zealand?
Namaste and kia ora koutou katoa, my very warmest greetings, and it is wonderful to be able to connect to people in Nepal because of that very special bond that our two countries share together. The good news is that as of today in New Zealand, we're in a very positive situation. We now have 0 active cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand. The final case of COVID-19 was resolved today, so we're down to 0 active cases. And as of today, we have moved down to alert level 1. So New Zealand has had 4 alert levels. Level 4 was the highest level where we had a very strong lockdown. Everyone had to stay at home for approximately 5 weeks.
Right, such an opportune time to be talking to you at this very moment. And now it's a time when you talk about New Zealand and the first thing that strikes one's head is, Jacinda Ardern. And your Prime Minister has certainly stolen the spotlight and even amidst this corona crisis.
Well, yes, that's right. We've had extraordinary leadership from our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. She's someone of exceptional integrity, and I think that the thing that people have kept saying to me throughout COVID-19 is that even though she and the government have asked people to take unprecedented steps to not go to work, to close their businesses, to stop going to their churches and temples, to stay at home, funerals and weddings had to stop, everything came to a standstill. People said to me that it was easier to do that because they knew that the Prime Minister was there walking with them. She wasn't instructing them on what to do, she was one of us. And people could see her empathy and her care for her fellow New Zealanders as she communicated that message. So we have been very fortunate to be able to be led by her at a time of crisis like this. And her leadership has played a big role in the success of the country. But what I also know is that if you said that to our Prime Minister, she's a very humble person, and she would acknowledge that our success as a country has been the shared efforts and shared sacrifices of everyone. She always talks, whenever she talks about our team of 5 million. So she has created a sense of social solidarity of all New Zealanders working together to save lives and beat COVID-19. And we're very proud of her for that.
Right, it's certainly a very, it's a matter of great pleasure to watch her live on social sites, giving us updates, the vibrancy, the dynamism and the tactfulness that she's been portraying and redefining leadership at the moment. Certainly, it's a pleasure. Let me come back to the pandemic, Your Excellency. When the world was on a wait and watch mode back in January or the beginning of February, that's what I'm talking about, you sealed your international borders, and this was a time when the WHO had been suggesting or recommending against it. Now, how difficult was it at that time for you to devise these plans and decisions?
Well, of course, at that time, the pandemic was moving at an incredibly fast pace. The approach that our government took, and our Prime Minister led this from the front, was go hard and go early. And that was, I think, what put us in very, very good stead. The Prime Minister and other key ministers in our public health system very quickly analysed the information and determined that the best approach, both in terms of a public health response, in terms of saving lives. So we were one of the earliest countries to close down our borders, one of the earliest countries to put an alert level system in place, and one of the earliest countries to have the full lockdown that we had during the March to May period. And so those decisions would be made by our Prime Minister and our Cabinet, which is made up of two different parties, very quickly. And so my colleagues in the government had to absorb enormous amounts of information and make serious decisions that were life and death decisions for people in our country. 3 months later, New Zealand having effectively eliminated the virus and being able to move to alert level 1, that they made the right decisions at the right time.
Right. It's not only that you took the decision promptly and early, but from what we understand, New Zealand has had the most strict, social and economic restrictions. And given the monumental economic consequences you were likely to bear, or you would be bearing now, how difficult was the decision? Again, I get back to you on this, at that time.
Well, look, I think it was a very tough decision, and you're quite right that the restrictions in New Zealand, when we were at level 4, were amongst the most strict conditions of anywhere in the world. But the decision that New Zealand made very early, and this is extremely important to understand, is that we decided not to separate out the health response and the economic response. We decided that the best health response was also the best economic response. Because if we went hard and early, if we had strong restrictions in place at the beginning that helped to eliminate the virus, then we would be able to more quickly transition down to lower levels of restriction. If we did that at the beginning, we're now about the least stringent of anywhere in the world. And some countries that took less stringent measures at the beginning are having to carry them on longer and having to go up and down in terms of the levels of restrictions. So it was very tough to begin with, and it has led to a positive result for New Zealand.
Right. We're having this conversation at a time, when the bulk part of the world is still struggling with this virus. And as we talk about the economic and health linkages that New Zealand so, successfully considered and was able to put in effect, what can the world learn from New Zealand? Or what would be your suggestions to countries or economies who have not been able to compromise the economic consequences to the health securities?
Yes, well, look, we all have to learn from each other, and New Zealand isn't perfect, and there are things that we can learn from other countries as well. I think that some of the lessons, let me put it this way, I think the first lesson we should learn out of this is that putting a strong value on human life and human health is incredibly important. There were countries around the world who decided they would go down the herd immunity track and effectively accept that potentially thousands of people would die of this virus, but then there would be immunity and would be able to move forward. Our Prime Minister was very clear at the beginning that we would not sacrifice people, that if you put in place at the beginning a strong public health approach, if you take these things seriously, that is the best path forward, both for public health and the economy. But one of the other things that was incredibly important within this that we perhaps can learn from is the power of good communication. Because if you think about it, in any country, particularly a democracy, a government can say you have to stay at home, you can't go to work, you can't meet your friends, you can't go to church. But in practice, your power to enforce that over a population of New Zealand size of 5 million, let alone a bigger country, is very limited. If everyone decided to ignore that, it would have been difficult for the government to have controlled the situation. We were able to be effective with that because of the exceptional communication that came out from our Prime Minister and also from our Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. They fronted up every day on national television. They gave information, updated people on where we were at, answered questions from journalists, and that created a sense that the government was working with people, not just lecturing them and telling them what to do in terms of how to get the population to come along with you when you're asking to undertake unprecedented restrictions on their liberties.
Well, as you talk about this, let me also, out of much curiosity, share that much of the hue and cry in the whole global arena has been made, during the course of this pandemic over leadership and then the governance as well. They have come under immense fire, and we've seen, really consequences that have not been in favor of humankind. Now, based on your virus pandemic experience, Could you share what makes a leader successful in a crisis like this, besides the leader himself or herself? What else makes a successful leadership?
Well, I think we've had an extraordinary example of that in Jacinda Ardern. That's very important, I think, to absorb, because we sometimes have a model of leadership in our minds. When we say, what's a good leader? We think of these words like strength, getting things done, being tough. And Jacinda Ardern has all of those things. She's tough and she gets things done. But she has this core concept of kindness at the heart of her leadership as well. And that means that she puts the needs of people and communities first. And it means that when people see her on the stage making these decisions, they know that she's making them in their best interest as well. They can feel that we've had political leadership that has been very much informed by public health as well. Actually, New Zealand's response was very much informed by what our public health professionals said about the best way of beating this virus. So we had the kindness approach, but we were also strongly evidence-informed in terms of the leadership decisions that our government made as well. But in New Zealand, we had exceptional leadership across our society as well. Businesses, unions, NGOs all came on board. And I just want to make a special note, actually, the Kiwi Nepalese community were amazing. We've got a New Zealand Nepal Society here. Its president is a great guy called Dinesh Gadkar. They stepped forward and organised massive distributions of food and welfare to people in New Zealand, not just the Nepalese community, but everyone else. So we had leadership from our Prime Minister at the top, but leadership being demonstrated right through our society. And I think that's probably the kind of leadership you need to get through a crisis like this.
What are the economic consequences that New Zealand is likely to suffer despite the success that you have attained so far, and in the scenario that the global pandemic is not over yet?
Look, there's no doubt that every country, New Zealand included, faces a very severe economic shock because of COVID-19. We've had a very proactive response as a government. We're putting approximately 20% of our GDP into a massive stimulus package to try and support businesses to save jobs and create jobs. But even with that, we will not be able to save every business and every job. The reality of the knock to confidence and investment from a crisis like this means that there are serious economic consequences. We're starting to see that now, and we do know that we will face a significant increase in unemployment. So what we're doing as a government is really engaging as an active government. We have a wage subsidy scheme where for an extended period we're supporting businesses to pay the wages of their employees. We're providing free lines of credit to small businesses to help them with their cash flow situation. We're providing relief through the tax system, a massive retraining package for people who might lose their jobs and need to move into a different sector. So there's a huge impact, but we're trying to do everything that we can. The key thing is that we want to, as much as possible, preserve people's connection to their employer, because we know that if people lose that connection with their employer, go into the unemployment queue, it's much tougher to get them back. Even if you don't have money for the next few months, we will give you that money effectively so that you can keep that employee connected with you until we get to the other side of the crisis and you can earn some revenue again. And that so far has been very successful, and about 90% of employers have said it's helped them to keep their employees. But we are still braced for a significant economic shock here, and we'll keep doing what we can to support our businesses and our workers through this period.
Now, you've just made your national budget public. What does the recovery and rebuilding planning and policies look like?
And so as we kind of get through this period of having managed the health situation, we're turning our minds to now how we rebuild and recover. One very important thing our Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson, has said is that in the rebuild and recover phase, there's actually an opportunity. And he gives this analogy. He said, if your house had just burned down, would you then rebuild your house in exactly the same way as it was before? You probably wouldn't. You'd look at the problems and the opportunities of the current day, and you would rebuild your house to suit that. And so that is the approach we're taking through our budget. We are putting the investment in to support people to retain and create new jobs. But we're also trying to address some of the things in our society that we want to improve upon. We don't just want to go, like most countries, New Zealand has had a population of homeless people with no decent and stable housing. Well, during COVID-19, as a public health measure, we very quickly provided emergency housing for nearly all of the homeless people in our major urban centres. Now, we don't just want to go back to normal, where those people go on the streets. So in our budget, we've put significant investment in to say, we want to keep you in housing and try and use this as an opportunity to solve our homelessness problem. The package we've put in place around skills and training is another one. We're providing free apprenticeships and free trades training to younger New Zealanders for the next 2.5 years. Because we know that if we just accept that they lose their jobs, many of them will get into a place where they fall into unemployment for many years, and that has serious social consequences. So we're going to work very actively to give them skills and training and opportunity. So that's the concept of our budget. It's called Rebuilding Together. That notion that we've come through the crisis together and we'll rebuild together as well.
Right. We can also see that you have very beautifully created this link between health and economic strategies in the forthcoming plans that you are putting on the table. Now, could you share with us how important were health policies and infrastructures in New Zealand earlier, and how are things going to change in the future?
Look, incredibly important. And one of the reasons we have come through the health crisis as well as we have has been because of the fundamental strength of our public health system and the extraordinary professionalism of people on our front lines in the health system, the nurses and the cleaners and the orderlies and the doctors, the public health professionals and scientists who helped to guide us through this period. And so it's a real reminder to us that, you know, we've had a period across much of the world over the last 30 or 40 years where the public sector has been under attack. And, you know, the call has been to cut taxes and reduce the size of the state and all of this kind of thing. Well, you come up against a crisis like this and suddenly you realise why you need a strong public health service to give you the support and expertise to navigate your way through a global pandemic. So we've been incredibly, fortunate's the wrong word, it's been incredibly good that New Zealand has had that to fall back upon. But equally at times, the crisis has exposed areas where we have needed to do some work. So, for example, as we moved into through the alert levels, it became clear to us that we needed to strengthen our contact tracing system so that we could very quickly track down cases of COVID-19, isolate the people and find out who they've been in contact with. And it's fair to say that at the beginning of this crisis, that capacity was not in place. And so we've had to very quickly build that up. So yes, we've seen the strength of our public health infrastructure, but the crisis also reveals to you the areas that there is further work to do. And we've very quickly worked to address those areas, and we've been very delighted by the way in which our strong public health service has supported us to get through.
Right. And now coming to the glorious relationship of our two countries. And we all know 29th of May is a very, very important date for New Zealand and Nepal. We could not have celebrations this year like in the yestertimes.
Well, that's right. It was Everest Day is a really special and unique event that binds our two countries together. And we celebrate, you know, the ascent in 1953 by your great countryman Tenzing Norgay and our great countryman Sri Hillary of Sagamatha Mount Everest. And last year we had a wonderful celebration at our Parliament for Everest Day for the first time that one of my colleagues hosted. And we were looking forward to doing it again this year, but obviously it wasn't possible to do that. So in different ways, through Zoom meetings and online connections, there was some acknowledgement of that and through social media as well. But it would be really wonderful to be able to get back to next year celebrating and acknowledging that incredible achievement that binds our two countries together. In New Zealand, we have a very strong and active Nepalese community here, and it's been one of the privileges of my role to get to know the Kiwi Nepalese community. Wonderful people, hardworking, generous of spirit. They carry with pride traditions from Nepal, but they are wonderful residents and citizens of New Zealand as well. I mentioned the New Zealand Nepal Society.
Before we come to a close of this conversation, if you could share with us, since you have over 12,000 Nepalis residing in New Zealand, and that also includes students, what was the approach that New Zealand practiced or used in managing the international diaspora during and post the crisis period?
Yes, well, look, the approach has been the approach of getting through this together. That's been the strength of New Zealand's approach, that we've all worked together through the crisis to support one another, to care for one another, to help one another. Government has tried to provide the support that people need. So, for example, we have set up a special fund to be supporting tertiary students. We've provided a wage subsidy for people whose work has been lost. We've provided tens of millions of dollars in money for relief and welfare to ensure that people have food and money to cover their accommodation costs and this kind of thing. But it's not just a one-way thing. It's not just the government providing those things. It's been wonderful support and leadership from the community as well. So I mentioned the way in which the New Zealand Nepal Society, along with many other groups within our ethnic communities in New Zealand, provided leadership and supported people across different communities as well. I know in particular in our Kiwi Nepal community, there's quite a big contingent of international students, and obviously they've been pretty vulnerable in a crisis like this. And so the New Zealand Nepal Society and others within the community have been really providing great support to those students to make sure that they're not isolated. And they've been working with government to make sure that the money that we have been providing gets turned into food and practical support and provided to those students and other vulnerable people in our community. So it's been, I think I used the words before, a great example of social solidarity, a truly marvellous thing to see in our multicultural society.
Well, thank you very much. It's such a great note to end this conversation on, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for sparing your very, very valuable time and sharing with us your very valued experience to the Nepali people here in Nepal. We stand amidst unprecedented circumstances that have come with challenges that are of complex and Herculean nature. What looks fundamental at the moment is of tactful and timely planning and execution. New Zealand has demonstrated it. Much can be learned. Thank you so much for being with us. This is Shivanee Thapa Basnyat with the entire crew. Until next time, signing off.